I just wanted to thank Mika and Andrew and everyone else in the staff and the volunteers for organizing this fantastic event. It's great to be here again, and I think everything is running smoothly. I feel a bit like the world's upside down because I'm up here and you, the experts, are in the audience, and I'm also between you and lunch. So, well, I'll try my best. I've been inspired by a trend that developed on Twitter in the Netherlands, and it's called Durf te vragen, dare to ask. It's also a hashtag. And I want to celebrate the network and this trend, which encourages asking others for advice and allows resolving challenges together. Perhaps because I'm Dutch, I increasingly feel surrounded by statement politics, one-liners, and stating instead of asking. So I stand here in the spirit of the network, interaction and conversation, which comes down to reciprocity. I think we need much more of. So I'm hopeful that the networks as they develop online will also foster a new kind of leadership. New talent, young people who get opportunities, which I'm an example of. Last year I ran on a no-budget campaign and was able to engage my existing network on an online journey towards being elected to the European Parliament. So, being a network politician allows me to build trust, and I'm happy to accept giving up a little bit of control over a message. This in return asks for a bit more slack from the network, so maybe this is my first question to you. But I also have a second question. I want to ask you to help me think about how politicians can work with people in a sustainable way, so that a shared sense of ownership over both challenges and solutions can emerge. So we can move beyond the click for support action, which I just learned is called slacktivism, or beyond thumbs up or down, to a more sustainable shared commitment to work on solutions. With the limited capacity I have, even though I have a fantastic team, I get hundreds of emails a day, tweets, messages and everything, and with the current infrastructure, working with civil society and people like you would really help me increase impact, and your impact also. Now I sometimes feel like the EU help desk. If you put yourself out there as a politician, people know where to find you, and they expect, preferably within an hour, an answer to all kinds of questions on noise pollution, animal abuse, standards of chemicals in toys, the Middle East peace process, human rights in Iran, etc., which is wonderful because all those questions underline an interest in Europe and a need for Europe to speak with one voice to offer information and solutions to people. But these questions are currently met with a lack of accessible information on the EU and on the legislative process, which makes effective lobbying difficult. Access to information is a challenge that needs to be solved on an institutional level. As Constantijn said this morning, the process is still very difficult and very inaccessible, not only to tackle problems, but mostly to harness the potential, such as by opening up data to allow for citizens, entrepreneurs and NGOs to work with it. We need networked institutions. Because as much as I was happy to hear about the plans that Stephen Clark presented, I'm still waiting for the first invitation from the people responsible in my institution to ask MEPs and citizens how they would like their institution to communicate the way we could use ICT facilities and social media. We need 21st century thinking and organizational structures that reflect this. I took a small initiative to put this topic on the agenda recently, sent a letter to all colleagues and asked 4 simple questions on improving ICT facilities in the European Parliament. And within days I had hundreds of colleagues co-sign the letter. We all would like to be able to upload a YouTube clip or watch one in our office or have Wi-Fi in our office buildings. All these simple facts are not available to us yet. Despite the hundreds of supportive responses, I also got one email that might also be exemplary. A colleague asked me, what is ITC, or rather ICT? So we have a lot of knowledge to foster. Besides the view behind the scenes, there are a number of policies that we can work on together, and I believe there's a real need to mainstream the policies related to the way our open economies, open societies and fundamental values are best served and defended, and the role new media plays in this. I work on foreign policy, which Andrew mentioned. I'm the spokesperson for human rights in Iran for my political group, but I also work on US-EU relations, Turkey's accession process, and the other portfolio I have is Europe's digital agenda. And I believe that the two are bending towards each other. Alec Ross this morning talked about the difference between open and closed societies and said we're all part of the struggle, and indeed I think we are. I applaud him and Secretary Clinton for their leadership, and it is my mission to have the EU, as a community of values, overtake this leadership position. If we end up somewhere between that ambition and the status quo, I think we would already have made a quantum leap. Within the EU, the digital agenda is in good hands with Commissioner Kroes, but Catherine Ashton needs more than a crash course on Twitter. I'm authoring a report on that topic to be voted on in February, and I want to put the subject of new media in external actions on the agenda. This has never been done before, and if you have any ideas on the role new media should play in the EU's external actions, which is becoming one coordinated foreign policy since the Lisbon Treaty was adopted, please let me know. I believe the impact new media has on our societies cannot be compartmentalized, so mainstreaming in our policy areas is important. So I want to give you a few examples of how I've made an effort to mainstream some of these new media aspects into different EU policies. As you may know, the EU has a number of partnership agreements which regulate preferred trade circumstances between the EU and third countries. And there's already a conditionality in these trade agreements that asks for certain standards in democracy and human rights. But I think we need to include specific mentions of the internet, freedom of expression online, and access to information. So I've taken that initiative consequently throughout all trade agreements. This afternoon there will be a workshop specifically devoted to the citizen initiative, which you're all welcome to come to, where the role of the internet will obviously be one of the key issues in quantifying support for an issue among European citizens. The discussion on copyright in the EU and completing the EU's digital market is a very important one. And I've worked on a number of resolutions that point out the way in which new media are used to limit human rights by repressive regimes and how fundamental freedoms are hampered in countries such as Azerbaijan, Egypt, Iran, Burma and Venezuela, and also Syria, which was mentioned. But I also amended a few reports focusing on how refugees need information and access to the internet. It's been described to me as oxygen of fundamental importance. And also this afternoon we'll hear from Birgitta from Iceland. She's a parliamentarian who initiated the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, and we were able in the European Parliament to in turn commend that initiative and have it included in the report on Iceland's accession process towards the EU. So I think these are a few examples of mainstreaming. Besides mainstreaming, I think coordination is very important. Too often we learn too late about where other colleagues are working. I'll give you one example. We had a report on human rights violations in Iran, and we called out Nokia Siemens company for their export of technology systems to the regime. They offered a mobile network, which was then used to spy on people, to find people, to filter information. But later we learned that Nokia is bound by European standards to produce this way. So how can a European institution call out on their misbehavior while at the same time it's asking to produce according to those standards in a time where there were no boycotts or sanctions yet? So this is an example of why coordination is also important, so that we're not contradicting ourselves. So I'm rounding up. I want to jump from the global perspective and briefly touch upon the risk of tunnel vision. I want to make a plea for looking outside of our own biotope as we're sitting here together, outside of our immediate network. I think we need to include people who are not self-selected and attracted to this community and network, and it's a responsibility of politicians in democracies, whether they're networked or not, to represent and consider the minority voice. I think we all need to be aware that networks can easily be made visible, as we've seen in some of these beautiful presentations, and the causes with which these networks are working and who they're supporting. And so politicians can become increasingly calculating. It's not difficult to know where majorities lie, and votes in politics is like money in the economy, so it's very attractive. So I think it's important to find a culture, maybe a new leadership style, a dialogue, a conversation about how these minorities can also be represented and how we can make space for that and not just go for sort of a market working of polls and votes on Twitter. So from my personal experience on how I experienced the European Parliament from the inside when it comes to ICT, to my plea for mainstreaming policies when it comes to new media, and a small warning against the tunnel vision. Let me ask you the following before we head to lunch. The European Parliament annually awards the Sakharov Prize. This is a prestigious prize that highlights freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And I've nominated a wonderful network called Access. It's a network of people across the world who work to make technologies available to defend human rights. And we're starting a big campaign. We're down to the top 10 and they're in it. There will be a video release next week, but I'm hoping that you, from your organizations and networks, are willing to support this nomination and to that way make sure that new media, human rights are a little bit higher on the European agenda, and that we make sure that, that we defend the freedom of expression also online. So I want to thank you for your help in making it a stronger and more trusted network to promote and defend our open economies and democracies and to defend human rights and fundamental values. Thank you.